Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. This is the Tales from the Jar Side live stream. With this time, we are talking to, well, first of all, I should say, my name's Ken Cousin. It's Cousin like the relative, it just doesn't look like it. And my guest this time is the definitive Spring developer, the Spring man. That's Craig Walls. Hey, Craig, how are you doing?
I'm good, although I'm not sure I would accept that title. There's people who are really good at this that aren't me. But yeah, I just got a thing on my watch, has your face on it and everything. So if I can get that on the camera, see, there you go.
Oh my
Saying that
goodness.
the thing has started. It's time.
Are you going to get the new watch or whatever the new, or is it just a new OS?
It's a new watch. There's a Series 9 is the new one. I'm on a Series 3. So
Oh,
I'm way behind, but I am tempted to go ahead and get it.
Simon is here. See, I can put up his comment there. So thank you very much for coming, Simon. I really appreciate that. One of these days, I'm going to have Simon as a guest. So I imagine if you're interested, Simon, let me know. We'll talk. So are you an Apple person primarily? You go with an iPhone and all the other Apple stuff?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. I mean, I didn't buy into the whole HomePod stuff because that's a really expensive speaker for no good reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, I have looking at my desk right now. I have two MacBook Pros. I have an iPhone. Of course, I have my watch. Um, but I also have a few Amazon devices as well.
Well, I figured, and we'll get to that, of course, because just as a teaser, Craig is the author of a recent Pragmatic Programmer's book on writing Alexa skills. Right? What's the name of the book?
Build talking apps for Alexa.
Build talking apps for Alexa. We'll have to paste a link into the comment when we get to that point. Or you can feel free to paste it in whenever you feel like it.
Yeah, I have to go look it up, but yeah.
Well, or I'll do it, but it'll be fine. Any rate, I want to spend more time talking about Spring, but and the thing you've been doing a lot lately, which is the Spring AI project. But even before we get to that, I want to talk about your history a little bit, because even though we've known each other for many, many years, I mean, I feel like I know some things about you, and we'll get to the Disney stuff at some point as well, I imagine. But how did you wind up getting into IT? Were you one of those few people who started in IT and stayed there the whole time, or were you a career changer, or what's your path into all this?
Yeah. So I started in IT when I was like, I don't know exactly the year, but I was probably around 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it started when my dad brought home a Commodore VIC-20, and that
Yep.
was fun. And then it wasn't too long after that. It seemed like it was almost like a few days after that, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. It was probably a year or two. He brought home a Commodore 64, and I just knew at this point that I wanted to do this thing. This is the kind of thing I wanted to do. And
Did you have a cassette tape drive on that?
oh yeah, the Goal 1520. Yes, that had one of those, and of course we had the 1541 disk drive when we got around to the Commodore 64.
I never had that, but I had a friend who had it. I used to go over to his house so we could play some. I don't even remember the game anymore, but it was a game that used the tape drive and all that. I'm sorry, so go ahead.
But yeah, I mean I pretty much was done. But yeah, it's evolved from there. I mean, obviously I'm not doing a whole lot on a Commodore 64 these days.
No,
I
but
actually had one up until a few years ago, but
oh
um,
wow.
I still doing this, just doing the
And
thing because one of the things that I enjoyed as a kid, and I know you do too, is science fiction. And science fiction promised me a future where computers knew everything and I could ask them anything. And obviously, that was science fiction then, but now it's starting to become more reality. And I've been along for the ride the whole time.
so were you an undergrad in computer science then?
Yes.
Yeah, where did you
Um,
go?
New Mexico State University.
Oh, of all places. I had no idea. So now you grew up when I first met you, you were in the Dallas, Texas area.
Right.
Are you a native Texan?
No, not at
No.
all.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
originally from New Mexico,
Oh,
southeast New Mexico, far southeast New Mexico, almost in Texas. In fact,
okay.
If you go look at a map on Google Maps and you
Uh-huh.
go down to right where the bend is in Texas, in that
Yeah.
corner of New Mexico, there's a little town called Jal, Jal. That's where I was born, and that's where I lived for about 20 years of my life.
Wow, I had no idea. And then where's New Mexico State?
It's in Las Cruces, New Mexico,
Las Cruces?
kind of the South
Okay.
Central,
Okay.
just north of El Paso.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Hinojosa, who we both know, is actually he's the only guy I know who lives in New Mexico now. He's in the Albuquerque area, but that's a long, long way away, kind of a whole different world, I would think. Um, he's the one who deals with the blue meth and all of that,
Right.
So when you graduated, where'd you wind up going first?
Well, went to Dallas. That's where I moved.
Oh,
Went there for a job. Not sure I should mention the name, although the company doesn't exist anymore. But it was a major telecom corporation. Let's just say that. And I worked
why
on
not?
their frame relay stuff. Their ordering fulfillment system for frame relay.
But you were coding or were you doing
Yeah,
networking?
coding.
So you
But
were
it
coding.
was the fulfillment, the ordering system. So when companies would strike a deal with this company and for frame relay, then somebody would go into a system and place an order, and then it wasn't the networking itself, but the kind of the pipeline through which the order would flow, and along with that, it would send messages to the network to set all this stuff up, but it wasn't directly dealing with the network. In a way, I look back on that experience, and we didn't call it this at a time, but it was, in many ways, it was a microservices architecture, because
Oh,
there's
really?
individual deployments, individual
Hmm.
applications that were responsible for different parts of this pipeline. And they communicated with each other by basically dropping their status in a database. And so the next thing would pick it up and go from there. But it was, it doesn't have to be HTTP for it to be a microservice. And so that was a form of microservice.
What language did you code it all in?
I'll see.
That was C at the time, right? So it was all based on Unix systems?
Mm.
Everything done that way. Okay, fascinating. So how long were you there?
Too long. I forget, 3 or 4 or 5 years. I can't remember exactly. Probably about, just mentally doing the math, about 4 years. Yeah.
And then where'd you go from there?
I've went a few different places that aren't worth talking about. I just
Okay,
had
well
to get out of there.
let's
But then
get
I
to the
ended up
good
going.
stuff.
I ended up going to Michael's, the craft store.
Okay, so you went through a series of places that you weren't thrilled with. At some point, you wound up in a company that has gone by various names, but at the time was probably called Spring, right? Or was it called something else when you got there?
Let's see. It was originally called Interface 21,
Ah, wow, that far back. Okay.
and then VMware purchased Interface 21. Or no, I'm sorry. Before that, it changed to Spring Source,
Yeah, Spring Source is when I first knew about it.
and
So
then
what
VMware purchased Spring Source,
uh-huh.
and then I joined VMware as part of the Spring team, and
Oh, okay.
then we were spun off into Pivotal, and then VMware reacquired Pivotal, and so back VMware.
Yeah, from what I gathered, I mean, I assume that all that really changed for you is your email address changed multiple times.
Yeah, pretty much. And there was some debate on whether we should use Google Docs versus the Microsoft stuff
Right.
online. I don't know, but no big deal.
Yeah, that question that Simon asked, by the way, about just for the people who are listening rather than watching, Simon asked about Spring AI. For now, based on the code base and description, it seems to be mostly focused on prompts. They do have those nice prompt templates. Do you envision it growing further to include other generated sources? And that'll probably give us a chance to talk about embeddings and loaders and all that stuff. And then he said, such as generative media sources like generating images, because as I recall, there's nothing like that. It's all purely chat based at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it
That's
depends on your definition of chat, but yeah, it's textual prompts and
conversational.
textual responses. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's all
where it's at.
conversation. Mm-hmm.
And it had to get, it had to start somewhere, and it's still a really new project, and
It's alpha.
yeah, very new, and it had to start somewhere. But even in the textual prompt space, there's still a lot of growing it has to do. There's a lot of things that are missing out of it. Things like it does do embeddings. I was pleasantly surprised that it actually supports embeddings.
Right.
And but what I was disappointed it didn't support is functions, and which is another way of providing your own data into it. And I've used functions a little bit with the OpenAI, OpenAI's direct API, or its little SDK or library that it has. I've done it there, and I've done a little bit with LangChain, but Spring AI does not yet have that, and so that's a to do.
When you say you experimented with the API, did you use the REST API or did you use Python?
Used neither. I mean, I am using the REST API, but I'm not using the Python one because I just don't know Python as well, and I didn't want to use this as an excuse to learn Python. And so it turns out that there's some great, both with LangChain and with Llama Index, there's some great support for Node, and I do know Node fairly well. So,
oh, that's right. One of your videos, I guess the most recent one, the one where you did LangChain, you did everything in Node, as I recall.
right.
Which that's the one where I was kind of lost because I don't know much Python either, but Python tends to be readable even if you don't really know it very well. I wouldn't trust myself to write Python, but I can generally follow what they're trying to do. You know, it makes some sense. But with Node, I'd get lost in the JavaScript. Oh, by the way, here's a question that you can address later or not at all if you'd want it. At some point, you know, the whole issue of JavaScript versus TypeScript came up. You know, DHH, David Heinemeier Hansson,
Yeah,
wrote that big blog post how they at his company abandoned TypeScript because it was just overhead and made life complicated, and they lost the joys and flexibility of pure JavaScript. And as anything where he takes a major stand on an issue where there are legitimately people on both sides, it became somewhat viral. Did you have a stand on that, by the way? An opinion
well,
about it?
I honestly don't, other than the fact that if he decided to take a stand against it, then I probably am going to take a stand for it,
I hear you.
just because. But honestly, I don't. TypeScript has been one of those things that I've always found interesting, and I see the potential for me to really enjoy it, but I just haven't had a good experience so far just getting started with it. And as an example, we're going to talk about this later, I'm sure, too. But as you mentioned, I developed for Alexa, and one of the frustrations I have is that there is currently not a good template, like a getting started template to build Alexa skills with TypeScript. It's you got Node, you got Python, and you got Java are the three main ones, but there's not a good starting point if you want to do it in TypeScript. So literally last night, this is the last thing I did before I went to bed, I created a template to do that. And also instructions on how, if you wanted to do it yourself, you could start from the plain JavaScript version and convert it into a TypeScript version.
This is for Alexa, right?
Yeah. Just because I wanted that experience doing that. And the main reason I wanted that experience doing that is because there's some stuff coming out that were announced yesterday specifically around LLMs and Alexa. And they talk in the article about how they're going to enable some of this kind of give it the hints, give the LLM some hints about how it can call into your own code. And rather than do it declaratively like in a YAML file, you can put what are essentially annotations. I guess they call them decorators in TypeScript. But you can put these decorators on your functions, and that basically serves as your hint to the LLM. Hey, if you need this information, call me. And they're going to do that, they said, for all supported languages, but they're going to start with TypeScript, which I thought was an odd statement because while TypeScript is supported, it's not the most natural thing you go to when you start working with Alexa. So anyway, all that to say this, that led me to create a template for TypeScript so that I would have something to work with when this stuff starts becoming available.
Well, let's talk about that now. So when did you decide you wanted to write a book about Alexa?
Well, let's see. It was about the same time that I became insane, because that's when I decided it was a really good idea to write two books at the same time. Which is not a good idea, but I was updating Spring in Action 6, and I decided, hey, let's also write a book about Alexa. But what happened is a few years ago, and it's been a few years now, like 5 or 6 years, I wasn't anti Alexa, but I also wasn't pro Alexa. I was just, I was ambivalent to it. And when I had an opportunity to tinker with it a little bit, because Amazon back in the day used to have all these different like developer programs, and one of them was,
Right.
hey, if you develop a skill this month that does such and such, we'll send you a free Echo Dot. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I want a free Echo Dot or not, but I'm not going to turn down free hardware. Let's just see if I like this.
Yeah.
And so I did it, and it was fun, and I got the free Echo Dot. And since then have purchased several more, and Echoes and Echo Shows and things like that, because I'm super into it. But I enjoyed it so much, and then I started doing some other stuff with it, and started building up even bigger projects, more than what I did. And I thought to myself, well, this is a topic that nobody's really talking about too much. I mean, there were a few books out there on it, but they were sort of already slightly outdated. And there was another one being written kind of in parallel to mine, but I think it was written largely in Spanish. So I thought, hey, might as well write a book about this and then enlighten people on how to do that.
Yeah, Simon points out that there's a regional lock on Alexa. You can't use English skills because he lives in Belgium.
Yeah,
which is bizarre.
I don't know how to answer that other than say you're right. It sucks.
So I remember you saying you were going to write an Alexa book. Of course, at the time, you were well known for the Spring in Action series. I mean, that's still been through 6 editions, right?
Right, 6, and I'm starting on 7.
That was my next question, because I don't think 6 is even on Spring Boot 3 yet, right?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is. It's okay.
Yeah, that was the big thing for the 6th edition was Spring Boot 3.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that now. So I assume the new one will be on 3.2 then.
It'll be starting with that, and then depending on timing on whatever happens between then and the time it gets published.
So you did have to write it with Java 17. Speaking of which, did you download 21 yesterday or the day before?
Oh, wait, maybe I'm wrong. It wasn't on 3? Maybe it's not.
I don't know. I mean, it seems like it was a little bit early for that.
Yeah, you may be right.
Yeah.
I've lost track. To me, everything's Spring Boot 3 now. So it's just
yeah, right.
My book should have just automatically adapted. But yeah, you're right. I think
Are you going to write the new one on 21?
It's going to be at least 17, but I'll probably show some of the 21 goodness in there.
I got to check. Okay, I just went to the start.spring.io, and sure enough, they've got 21 as an option today, because they released the new one, right? The new version, the new milestone for 3.2 and the new official version for 3.1, whatever number that is. I guess it's 3.1.4 and 2.7.16, although that doesn't care about Java 21 though. Oh, yeah, I think Simon's right. I think it was on 2.7. And then he says, next one, all the fun with Graal VM native builds and crack. And oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yes,
right.
Of course.
Yeah. So, of course. And the way I understood it when I first got involved with Manning, now this was, I don't know, 2012, 2013. I spent like 3 years writing the Making Java Groovy book for Manning. And the word around Manning was that Spring in Action was their most successful book ever, if you counted at the time all 5 editions. And now I assume if you count all 6, it's still there. I assume. I mean, do they ever tell you?
I'm writing 7 is I got to stay on top of this.
Yeah, well, and there's been a lot of changes. I mean, if you want to have something current, I mean, you're going to have to keep. So when do you start that? Do you know?
When do I actually start?
Yeah, what's your plan?
It depends on the official date versus the real date. The official date is October 1st is when I start. Unofficially, I've already been kind of working on it for a while. So
how long does that typically take you, since you kind of know where you're going with a lot of it?
I don't know. It's always going to be longer than I think. For sure. But
at least a year?
I hope not. The schedule says no. The schedule says we're talking. I'll finish the writing phase by March. That's the schedule.
Oh, wow.
Of course, there's other things that go into that, and the main reason it's going to go is the schedule is as tight as it is because I went through the table of contents for Spring in Action 6, and I just made notes. Here's the things that need to change. Here's the things that need to be added. Here's the things I can yank if I don't want to talk about them anymore. And at the end of it, I really am only touching nine out of 18 chapters. And so, I mean, I'm going to touch probably all of them to some degree, but significant changes are really only affecting 9 out of 18 chapters. So I'm only really doing a half a book, and even then it's only an update to a half a book. And the other thing is you have to, and I have to make myself do this, is I have to make sure I stay on topic and not like get excited about things like Spring AI and try to add a chapter on that, because unless something changes, I'm not adding a chapter on that, because it sort of is outside of the scope of what the main book is about. Plus it's still so new that I'm not sure I have a lot to write about. I would rather wait until that's gelled some more before I write about that.
Okay, well, we can come back to that more, but I am interested. Now, I've been making videos recently about interacting with all these AI tools directly from Java, because from my point of view, without using Spring or without using any framework at all, they're all just RESTful web services if they have a REST API. Not all of them do. Midjourney doesn't, many of them don't, but most of them do, especially OpenAI. And to me, therefore, I use the HTTP client that was added in Java 11, and I have to add in a JSON parser, and I mostly pick JSON. Now, obviously, when you go to Spring, especially the HTTP interfaces, handle all that networking for you, and they've got Jackson built in. So I guess that brings up the issue: what does Spring AI bring to the table? Now, I have a rough idea, but you've been playing with it a lot more lately. Why don't you introduce the people who haven't seen it or looked at it yet? What extra does Spring AI bring to the table?
At the moment, you pretty much already summed it up, because it is, again, relatively new. This is the starting point. This is kind of the tracer bullet through to get us from a prompt to a response. But Spring AI is being influenced and inspired by some of the existing libraries like LangChain and Llama Index. And if you look at LangChain and what it does, why does it exist when using something like Axios or Fetch in Node would also achieve the same thing? Sure, you can do that. You could use any HTTP client in Node to make those requests. There's no reason you can't. But what LangChain specifically offers on top of everything else offers a couple of, well, there's actually several things, but there's two things that come to mind immediately, because they're kind of foundational to this, is chains and agents. So like a chain is like a predefined set of steps that we want to get to from the time we think we're going to make a prompt to the time we get an answer back. And it just depends on what kind of chain you're talking about. But some of that means that we're going to keep memory. So if you're wanting to actually keep some context between each question you ask, like in a chat format, then you're going to involve memory. If you want to somehow include some content from your own documents, that's what's called embeddings, and there's a chain for that. If you want to invoke functions, there's a chain for that. If there's all these different types of chains that build up the prompt, that handle the response, if necessary, add some more and submits a new prompt, and then returns back the response. All that's happening inside the library or the framework, not happening by me making multiple REST calls, interpreting the response, and making the next call. It's just all happening inside. And what agents are they're kind of like chains. It's the same idea. It's not a predefined set of steps. It's more intelligent. It says, okay, I didn't anticipate that they would absolutely come back with this response, and this would be the next step I need to take. But since that's the response I got back, here's what I'm going to do. It's more fluid. It doesn't have a predefined set of steps. It makes a decision based on what the user asked, what the LLM responded. It keeps flowing through this cycle until it has everything it needs to produce a response back. And if that's what doesn't have what they need, then the answer is I don't know that type stuff. But it sits there and goes through these cycles for you. And you could do that. You could certainly build that kind of thing yourself with any HTTP client, but you're building that yourself. And
well, with GPT-4, it's kind of famous for the fact that, first of all, if you tell it to walk through the process step by step, it's far more likely to give you correct answers because it doesn't get distracted by just some pattern matching to take a shortcut. And also in GPT-4, I guess specifically, you've got the option of using extensions. You've got the plugins. And therefore, you could say, okay, I think the example I just read in a book last week was something like, what is the average population, or what was it? It was maybe it was something per capita of the population of the city that hosted the Olympics in 2016 or something like that. And by going through it step by step, it would use extensions to go check Wikipedia to find out where the Olympics was. And then it would also check a different Wikipedia page to find out the population of Brasilia, because it would default to Rio de Janeiro because that's the most commonly referenced city in Brazil, so it would get it wrong unless it looked at Wikipedia, and then it would find the population, and then it would kick into a calculator plugin in order to do the averaging or the whatever, something like that. And if I understood correctly with LangChain, and for those who are not aware, LangChain is a framework written for Python and Node, I think, right? That really is all about coordinating a series of interactions with these AI tools, with the LLM tools. And it really is interesting. The first time I ever heard of it is when I watched your video, when you talked about you mentioned it in the Spring AI video, saying that LangChain was a lot of the inspiration for Spring AI. But you're right. If you had to put in all those plugins yourself, then, that was one of the reasons I wanted to do AI programmatically, because for one thing, I couldn't get them to read files on my local file system. Whereas I could write code to read the file from the local file system and send them data and get responses back. And then I could programmatically connect to other things as well. That was a natural thing for me to do, and that wasn't available. Now, Bard yesterday, I think that's when the announcement was made. Did you notice that Google announced that Bard now has, they don't call them extensions. What do they call them? I don't know. But they are integrating with many of their own tools, Google Docs, Google Sheets, something else, and then YouTube as well, which of course, that's Google. And you can then ask questions, and it's supposed to integrate the functionality there. But Google's every time Google does something, I get the same reaction. I get like, boy, they really don't get it, do they? But I can probably work with this. That's how I always feel about Google stuff. And I tried it out. And the first thing they did that threw me off is you can't use it with a business account. And of course, my company, my one-person company, has a business account. So that meant I had to use my personal account, and all my email over there is not the email I wanted to search. I wanted to integrate with Gmail and tell me, because, I've always been astonished at how bad the search capabilities are inside of Gmail,
Right.
But I wanted to answer questions about my Gmail and then go to YouTube, and it's not good. Now, I know when Gemini comes out, which they're projecting October, November, that's supposed to be comparable to GPT-4, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Well, the reason I don't know why. I didn't even read the details of that yet. I haven't had a chance, but I imagine the reason why it doesn't work with business accounts is because they're protecting themselves and you from sharing private data with their LLM. It's a privacy concern, because at some point, even in the embeddings example I gave, if in my videos, if you're doing that kind of thing with your company's internal documents, you're trusting, and this is probably not something you shouldn't do, but you're trusting that what you send over there in the embeddings is not going to be used for any other purpose other than to answer your questions. And so that's a concern. And that's probably not going to be allowed by your company. So at some point, if you're doing that kind of thing, you're going to have to bring that model, bring that stuff in-house, and either have your own internal private LLM that you're interacting with, or train up your own LLM and on your own documents rather than even use embeddings, which is something I don't know much about, but it sounds like a lot of work. And
yes.
So,
well, now back to answering Simon's original question, or one of them. What Spring AI one of the things that Spring AI brings to the table that I would have to do manually is, first of all, the prompt templates, which is something that LangChain has in abundance, and they have ways where now, a lot of that you could do with Java's multi-line strings. You
You
know,
could do it
because
in Node with the backticks and $ curly brace.
yeah,
So
but I'm a Java person. So I mean, in Groovy and in Kotlin, it would be trivial. In Java, it used to be very difficult. We still don't have string templates, and the string templates they're proposing that's a beta in 21 is just so unbelievably ugly. I don't know. I mean, everybody reacts badly against that. I even saw a defensive post yesterday about why are people so upset about this? You know, it's not like we didn't think them through. And I'm like, okay, if you say so. But at any rate, they do these prompt templates where you're allowed to set up your formatted questions and then just substitute values into them, especially if you had to do multiple ones. But the other thing it brings to the table is, I think I don't know what they call them in LangChain, but in Spring AI, I think they're calling them output parsers.
mhm.
And what do the output parsers do?
They take, and LangChain has the same idea. In fact, they call them output parsers there.
Okay, that is what
And
they call them.
and it's sort of the other way around. And sort of, instead of forming up your prompt, it's taking whatever you get back as your response and forming it into some model data. So instead of getting back text saying, okay, the top songs of 1980 were, and it starts in human speech listing them off, it could come back as in like a JSON format and with a schema that you define. And so what the output parser does is two things. First off, it can inform the prompt, this is the schema that I want it to come back in. And secondly, once it does come back in that format, it can bind that to some Java objects.
Well, okay. I saw that. The thing is, both of those things, I feel like, again, I could write myself. Although, again, it'd be great that they have it already built in, but it doesn't seem enough of a reason to dive in if I was doing it myself. But the other thing, and this is what really struck me about your second video, the first video that just introduced Spring AI did the basic, yeah, let's just send a request and get a response back, and now let's format it a bit, was this idea of embeddings. And for those who are not aware, the way this worked, and I had never seen it prior to you doing it, now I've read about it a bit, is that, of course, one of the problems with tools like GPT is that the training for that stopped in June of 2021. And therefore, anything that happened after that, and Java 17 came out in September, you know what I mean? They don't know anything about anything that came out later than that. And with embeddings, you can take your own documents, your own information, and put it together in a specialized format that, like LangChain wants it in exactly certain JSON structure, and upload all that. And then it can do, and I was trying to figure out where the heck GPT came in on this. It does sort of a similarity comparison. So you could do a query asking about the documents you loaded. And then why don't you talk about what you did in your video and what you thought about it?
Yeah, the way you described that was almost right.
Okay.
What
I'm
happens
still
is
learning, you know.
I'll use my video's domain as the example as I talk about it here. So I'm a big board gamer. I like playing board games and card games and stuff.
Yeah.
And so if I wanted to ask GPT about the rules, to get a rules clarification on some game, it might answer correctly, but it probably won't.
Right.
I've even tried this with certain games. I've even asked it a couple of times to explain to me how to play Carcassonne, which is it's a game that's been out for a while, well before the training happened.
Right.
And it explained to me Carcassonne in great detail using the same game components as Carcassonne, but with a completely different rule set, something that was completely not correct. And so I'm like, okay, this is not going to work.
Right.
And then if you take into consideration that there are some games that are more obscure, like the one I used is called Burger Battle.
Right.
It's not a well-known game. I mean, it's not like totally obscure. There's a lot more obscure games than Burger Battle, but it's one that definitely, when you asked GPT about it, it had no idea what Burger Battle was. And so I thought, well, what if I used that and trained it on the rules of Burger Battle, and then it would be able to answer those questions. And I was shocked at how well it worked, by the way, just shocked. But the idea is that you take whatever documents that you have. In my case, it was board game rules. You take whatever documents you have, you feed them to a vector store, which is actually, that's up to you to come up with that. And there's several different implementations of vector stores. There's a couple of commonly known ones called Chroma, and Pinecone is another one. And these are great for like durable storage. And in my example, I used an in-memory one, which is horrible for production. But you would want to do this with more durable storage where it's there forever. Because what you want to do is when you throw it into the vector store, it's going to cost you to go ask OpenAI to turn those into tokens or vectors, essentially numbers. It's going to take whatever the rules are and turn them into a bunch of numbers.
Okay.
And that cost you. But I actually did the math this morning because I had somebody ask me this question separately. And my book, Spring in Action 6, I roughly estimated it to have 250,000 tokens. Roughly. I didn't do a full evaluation of it, but it's roughly 250,000 tokens. And at the cost for vectorizing it, the cost of doing that with OpenAI came out to, I haven't done it, but I did the math, and it came out to $25, if I remember right. And it's not breaking the bank. I'm not, going to go. No, it wasn't $25. It was, no, I'm sorry. I misspoke. It was like 2.5 cents to vectorize Spring in Action 6. And
oh, you mean using the embedding API?
Yeah, using the embeddings API.
Okay.
Right. It came out to 2.5 cents, which is, I could definitely do that. But let's just say I had a library of 1,000 books and I wanted to ask questions about that. Well, that's going to be where the $25 came in. What if I had 1 million books? Well, now it's $25,000. And of course, at that point, if you have that many documents that you're feeding to it, you're probably not doing a hobby anymore. You're probably doing a business at this point. And so maybe you do need to pay for this a little bit. But regardless, you only want to do that once. You don't want to do it on every request. You only want to do it once. So do it once and then store this in your vector database. And where you have that is up to you. That's an architectural decision you're going to have to make on where you keep your vector database. But once it's there, then what can happen is instead of feeding all 1 million documents in your prompt, you go search the vector database based on the question that was asked. And you say, okay, here's the question that was asked. Give me the top so many relevant documents, or the top K is what they commonly call it. Give me the top K relevant documents, but it's not going to give you, what happens is the document you threw at it gets chopped up into little documents. So you're not even getting like the whole book. You're getting like a little chunk of book. And what happens is now you have the top 4, let's say top 4 relevant chunks of your documents. Those go into the prompt as some context along with your question. And then at that point, the model is just reasoning over the context that it was given along with your question and saying, okay, here's the answer to your question. And it's like giving it an open book exam.
All right. Well, I want to ask some questions then, because this was all new to me. Okay. I mean, I know, I'd never seen that used in an AI application. I mean, I knew the section was there in the OpenAI documentation and that it was different from fine tunings. With fine tunings, you give it then you're giving it documents. Now, those, first of all, I'd never used a vector database, and I still haven't. I've only seen it used. I didn't even know what a vector database was. From what I understand, it's pretty much for unstructured data. Is that right?
Pretty much. I mean, I don't see any reason why you couldn't throw structured data in there, but
that was its use case. And as the word vector is so overloaded, I mean, there's so many different ways to interpret that. From what I gather, what they mean by a vector is something that transforms tokens or whatever the words you supplied into numerical values. And it's the AI that's coming up with those numerical values based on similarity or something like that, or figuring out how relevant, the same process that the LLM uses to train itself. Is that about right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a pretty high level definite explanation of it. The idea of vector being that it has both direction and magnitude.
Yes.
And so if you have 2 different sets of tokens or documents that are all have they're all pointing kind of in the same direction and with the same magnitude, then they're probably the same thing.
So it's doing,
if they're pointing in different directions, they're unrelated.
Okay, it's doing nonlinear statistics, basically, like most of neural network stuff is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the question then becomes, how do you get your data into this thing? And that's where Lang, what's it called again?
LangChain.
LangChain has these loaders.
Uh-huh.
And from what I see in the Spring AI documentation, they're going to have data loaders as well, but they're not there yet. Is that right?
There's a very simple loader, and it's not very useful.
I
I
mean, a
take that back.
great loader would be if you could feed it a PDF. Wouldn't that be great? You know?
Yes, and LangChain has a PDF loader.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's the thing is you're right. I misspoke. Spring AI does not yet have a loader. I wrote a
Right.
loader and submitted it as
Yeah.
a pull request, but it's also naive, and so if it never gets merged, I'll be fine with that as long as something like it makes it in there.
Right.
But the idea is it'd be nice. I can imagine all sorts of loaders. I can imagine a PDF loader, a Markdown loader, ASCII doc loader, just plain text loader. I could imagine going out to a website and sucking its content down and loading that. I could imagine going out to a Google Doc, or I can imagine all sorts of different types of loaders for where you might get this data from.
But the use case is really different than just normal ChatGPT. I often, when I see people do ChatGPT and send it a question that you would know, whereas with the GPT, you wanted to do something creative, write this for me, come up with that, for summarize the following. Or what I love the most in the AI assistant inside of JetBrains, inside of IntelliJ, the thing I love the most that I just live on these days is the generate a commit message for me.
Right.
I love that it does that. It does a great job. It's not always perfect, but then I can edit it, and I hate writing commit messages, so I always put in minimal stuff. This thing is great. What you're talking about with embedding, however, not you, but in general, what people are talking about with embeddings and rules, it's almost like applying a rules engine and saying, yeah, this is the answer to your question based on what I find in here, but it's got all this natural language processing and everything in it.
Yeah. First off, let me say this. Twice now, you've skipped out and I didn't hear what you said.
Oh man, I don't know
But
what's
so
going
far,
on
I've
with
been able to fill in the blanks.
I should have
I think.
rebooted my machine. I meant to. I don't know. I'm getting some. My network is fine. Something's going on with my machine, I'm afraid. But yeah, I
But,
do apologize about that.
but it's essentially it's no different than it's really no different than I'm using essentially you might as well think of a vector database in this sense as a search engine. Here's the documents. Go give me the most relevant bits of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it has those relevant bits, that's sort of the open book exam for the LLM to answer your question. But the LLM is doing more than I would do. Like if I were to ask it a question about a rule, some game that I'm reading, I'm trying to learn or asking a question about, I would have to sit there and just scan through this thing and find what I'm looking for.
Right.
I'm just asking the LLM to do that for me, so I don't have to.
Yeah.
And it's actually proven useful already because even in the video I did, I learned something about a game I've been playing for years that we've been playing it wrong. And I at first when I got the answer back, I thought the LLM was crazy. I thought it was just hallucinating. But no, I went back and read the rules, and no, it was right. It was absolutely right.
Yeah. Whatever that thing was doesn't protect you against burger apocalypse, apparently, or
Right.
something like. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah. Oh, here's a good one. There you go. Kudos to the LM if it could help you run a Gloomhaven campaign.
Yeah, my boss actually bought Gloomhaven when it was on Kickstarter. He has not yet played it, and he was talking to me the other day about my video, and he said, what we need to do. He says if you feed the rules for excuse me, the rules for Gloomhaven in, he said I might be inclined to actually play it now because then I wouldn't have to be so overwhelmed with the rules for Gloomhaven.
So what we really
I
need,
don't do Gloomhaven. That's too big of a problem for me.
but what he's really asking for is for those loaders to be ready. Because you would certainly know how, if we had a PDF loader and you had the rules in PDF form. See, now I mentioned I read a book last week. This rarely happens to me, but a new book came out on from O'Reilly. So it was on the O'Reilly Learning Platform where I'd spent a lot of time, like you do, I think. right? Or sometime, at any rate. And the book was called Developing Applications with GPT-4 and ChatGPT, and brand new, short book, like 160 pages or something like that. And of course, since I've been spending the
Ken's
code
freezing out.
itself, sorry, did I blank out there again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what is going on. I hope that calms down, but we're only going to go about another 10, 15 minutes anyway. If worse comes to worse, we'll do this again. But at any rate, the code was all in Python, but I was able to follow it because they didn't put in thousands of lines of Python. They just put in. Oh, okay, wait for the image to come back. I'm trying to remember what example they used for their embedding one, but I think they did it all with straight text, as I recall. They just plugged in text, and they did it with, of course, LangChain, which already has all these loaders built right into it.
Right.
And I get the feeling that this capability is something that will be very new to most Java people. I had never seen that in any other context before. And that might be a big selling point for Spring AI, because as Simon pointed out, it doesn't have, and it doesn't look like it's going to have anytime soon, the ability to connect to DALL-E or any other image generator. Oh, did you see DALL-E 3 was announced yesterday, or was it this morning?
I did.
Yeah, so that's supposedly going to be available to the GPT Plus users or whatever it is in October, and then the API shortly thereafter. So I look forward to that. Right now, of course, I use Stable Diffusion, which is really, really good, SDXL. And then there's Midjourney, which there is an API if you go through something called PicoGen. So I've been doing that. But I am looking forward to Spring AI, because if there's one thing Spring is really, really good at, it's providing the plumbing so you could just focus on the task. And that's,
Exactly.
I'm writing the plumbing by hand, which is kind of a fun exercise, but I wouldn't want to make a habit of it. I'd rather say, oh, well, Spring can do this, this, and this. Is there anything else in Spring AI that I'm forgetting about? I mean, they've got, I'm just looking at the table of contents, all these sections that are TBD. There's the chains, the data loaders, splitters. I don't know what a splitter is. Embeddings, vector databases, and something called evaluators. I'm not sure what an evaluator is.
Yeah, I don't know what that is yet either. But I think the thing that I'm just anxious to have is something more. First off, let's start with chains. And it's not just a single chain. There's probably several different chain implementations we need. But then
by the way, that one,
agents.
Let me just bring up a comment there before I forget it. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when you interact with OpenAI, when you interact with the API, you create messages. And a message is not just the content, it's also the role. And and system, which is an overall, looks like a generic thing, and then assistant is what it responds with. And when you make the output of one into the input of the next, like we're talking about here, you just append the assistant message into the, dare I say, chain, right?
That is a form of a chain, yeah.
But I've never really seen anybody care about the difference between system messages and user messages. I assumed Spring AI is going to deal with all of that. Is that right?
I mean, it is important. It does define whose role is who, and I don't think it's important so much as you could build up a prompt with all that stuff in a from the user's perspective, and say the user is saying, here's the information and here's how you're supposed to answer and all this stuff, and it would probably still work. I think I don't know this. I'm still a little fuzzy on this, but I think by separating out those roles, it gives the LLM a little bit more context about who's asking for this. So it helps it sort out whose job it is to do this. So if the system is saying, here's the rules, here's the ground rules, and answer whatever question the user asks, but here's the ground rules for answering that question.
Yeah.
And that gives the LLM a little bit more understanding of what its job is.
Just any example I've seen may have one system message, but then a whole series of user messages. And I'm not even that convinced that the LLM cares. You know what I mean? But it does, you do put in the assistant message, and it always felt weird putting in an assistant message, but you're just generally adding in the last one that came back. When I have a video coming out probably tomorrow where I was working with a Whisper API, you know, the audio to text approach. And the problem with the Whisper API is that it has a 25 meg file size limit. And for audio files, that's generally not too bad. For video, that's terrible. You know, video, it's not going to do it. And I don't want to always have to extract the audio before doing it. In that book that I read, they fed in a transcript. They didn't even bother, or no, they fed in an already extracted audio file. They didn't do it. But with Whisper, the way it works is that you could put in a quote prompt in addition to the audio file. And the prompt is supposed to be either a list of words that you want it to spell properly. You know, like I'd put in my last name, or I'd put in ChatGPT or whatever, you know, so I'd know how to spell that. And then for every subsequent message as part of the dividing the big, it only reads like 244 tokens or something like that of the previous one, but you just keep taking the prompt from the previous one and adding it in, and that makes it understand, oh yeah, these are all connected and this is all part of one big transcript. So I had fun writing that, but I don't know if they're going to have anything like that in Spring AI either.
Well, I mean, the idea of, again, this is one of the chains. There's different types of chains, but one of the chains could be that it has several questions that are being asked, and it takes the input or the output from one to feed into the input for the context for the next one. Right. And there's two different ways of thinking about that. One is that it's just simply taking an answer and feeding it as context for the next one. The other one is more of the chat model, where it's the entire chat is the context. And so that's what's called memory. And Spring AI already has a little bit of that built in. It's just not in a chain form yet.
By the way, that's where Claude.ai beats everybody. I mean, ChatGPT has a memory of either 4,000 tokens or maybe 8,000 tokens if you pay for extra.
Yeah.
But Claude has 100,000 tokens. As a matter of fact, I had Nate Shuda do a guest lecture for the students I have at Trinity. And what I did is I took his Thinking Architecturally book as a PDF. And then I went to Claude and I loaded it up, and their translation of 100,000 tokens is max size for the file was 25 megs, and his book was 23.8 or something like that. So I was able to load the entire book and then ask Claude questions about his book, which is kind of what we're talking about. We're just talking about having to do some of that stuff manually. Whereas Claude, you click a button, you click on the files, and it uploads it and is ready to start summarizing and answering questions about it. I wonder if Claude could do the answer questions about your game, you know?
Well, I'm sure it could. The difference is, though, instead of teaching Claude about all this stuff, or teaching any LLM about all this stuff, by storing it in the vector database first, we don't have to tell it everything. We only have to tell it the most relevant stuff.
Oh, right.
And that keeps the token count low, well, reasonably low. It's still higher than if you just simply ask the question, but it keeps the token count per prompt low.
Yeah.
It also keeps your price low. It also avoids the problem where you would max out the 4,000 token limit. Because
with 100,000 tokens, though, I mean, Claude's showing what's possible, you know?
Yeah, it is possible. I mean, there's no reason why you would even have to tell Claude all that stuff. It's like I said in my example, I said it's an open book exam, but I'm not giving you the whole book. I'm actually pointing you to the pages you need to read for this exam. And it's saving on cost per token. It's saving on the risk of maxing out the token limit. It's more focused. It's not reading the entire book just to find this one answer.
There was a question that Simon put up about, isn't it also being integrated into the new CLI tool? The part that I saw about that is that on the documentation page, thin as it is, they did point out that you can go Spring AI, you know, you could create a Spring AI app from the command line. I have not, I don't know what other functionality it has other than just creating the app with the right dependencies in it. Have you done anything with that, or do you know if it
I've
goes
done
anything
that.
beyond that? Yeah, you
I've done
did that.
exactly that.
And it just creates the app with a build file with the right dependencies. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So
And I think a little
it's
bit of
like running
example code.
it's running through start.spring.io, but Spring AI is not in start.spring.io because
Right.
it's an alpha. 0.2 is the version, I believe. Okay, well, that I have to ask you, since you have some insider access on this thing, is there any kind of time frame? I mean, when should we expect releases? When should we, are a bunch of people working on this full time? Is this something that we could expect a lot of progress from quickly? Can you
I
say yes?
don't know. I just can't say.
Have you
I
talked to
know
any
that
of the
there's a
major?
lot of people who are interested in it, and a lot of
Yeah.
people are excited about it, and a lot of people are wanting to see this move forward. I can't tell you how many are actively working on it. I can't tell you any time frame. I just don't know.
Who's the head of the project?
It's Mark Pollack. And Ken froze up again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, but he's done many things at Spring.
Right.
Simon also asked this question about Tidy. I'm not well. He said I'd love to have picked your brain a bit about Tidy first. I don't know what that's referring to. Do you,
I have no idea.
Simon? If you want to clarify that, be my guest. Uh, I think that's the list of questions. So we didn't. I don't think we missed anything major there. All right. Well, what are you doing these days, and what's coming next? And I mean, are you, unlike Dan Vega, whose day job at Spring, I'm still going to call it Spring, even though it's VMware. I mean, his day job is to make those videos. That's not your day job. You're just doing it because you want to, right? In the Spring in
Right.
Action one.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
that's
thinking of the wrong Ken. Okay. That you didn't see that. Sorry, I should show that. Yeah, that cracks me up. Yeah, I've gotten some Ryans mixed up recently, so I understand. No problem. No, so are you going to continue to be producing videos? Are you still working on AI? What are you doing at Spring related in general?
um answer to all that is yes, sort of. My main job, my day job, has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. What do you do?
Uh, I do. I'm working on a project called, well, I'm under an umbrella project called, well, I'm not even going to say the name because the name actually is misleading. But I work on a project called Application Configuration Service. And Application Configuration Service is a Kubernetes operator that consumes configuration from Git the same way that config server, Spring Cloud config server would. But instead of giving it to you via an HTTP endpoint, it creates secrets and config maps in Kubernetes. And that's a project that I started a couple of years ago. At the time, I was the lead developer, the project manager, the product owner, the QA person, I was everything. But now we have a team. And so I have other people helping me with that. But that's sort of my baby. And I've built that from the ground up. And it's part of a bigger umbrella project that is actually out there. If you're a user of Azure Spring Apps Enterprise, and you're using the configuration stuff, that's my stuff under the covers. And Tanzu Application Platform, or TAP, from VMware, also now has it as an optional component.
Now, you were the head of the Spring Social project years ago.
Time ago, yeah.
Did that split into some of these others, or did that go away, or is it just
Yeah, it
inactive?
was retired because the main thing that Spring Social did, the main goal of Spring Social it was a horribly named project to start with, but the idea was to offer the ability to kind of easily get past the OAuth client step and get those tokens so you could interact with an API that's secured with OAuth. But to demonstrate that, to give it some footing, we had to have some API bindings for things like Twitter and Facebook. And it turned out that everybody was excited about the API bindings and completely missing the point that this is helping you get past OAuth. And the problem is, with dealing with those API bindings, with Twitter, it wasn't so bad. Nowadays, it probably would be. But
Yeah,
at the time, Twitter wasn't that bad. It was Facebook. Facebook was changing on a whim. And so Spring Social Facebook had to change with it. And it was a huge undertaking. And I definitely didn't, I was not having fun doing that. And so once Spring Security came along and started offering some better OAuth 2 client support, that gave me the opportunity to sort of like retire Spring Social and say, hey, here's how you should do that now.
Okay.
And the other side of it is, even with Spring, social, Facebook and Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, it's a huge API. Most applications only need like this much of it.
Right.
And so my whole point was, once Spring Security started supporting that OAuth 2 client stuff better, my whole point was, hey, you build your API binding. I'm not going to give that to you. You build your own API binding with just the things you need. Spring Security is going to help you connect to it and get those tokens you need.
Now, 6. I keep wanting to do it. Okay, I'm mixing up my Spring versions with my Spring Boot versions. 6.1 in Spring, 3.2 in Spring Boot is scheduled for mid-November, I think.
That's what I believe.
Yeah,
I'm having a hard time keeping up with that myself, but yeah, I think that's right.
The big thing that's going to affect me, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of things in there, but the big thing that's going to impact me is the release of the REST client. The REST client, for those who are not aware, is a web client that's not reactive. It's like REST template, even though they've been saying for years, just because we put that note in the Java docs that it's not being updated anymore doesn't mean it's deprecated. I expect that once the REST client comes out, then yeah, REST template's probably going to be on its way out, if not formally deprecated. Have you heard anything different than that?
I don't know what the plan is for that. I do know that personally, I'm a big longtime fan of REST template, but I like REST client better.
I liked REST template. I used it for years because it was always a one-liner. It was so simple. Whereas with REST client, or web client rather, it's several lines, even though they're kind of the same. The other advantage to REST client, however, is that if you try out the Spring HTTP interfaces, join the choir. If you try out the HTTP interfaces, currently that only works with web client. And once 3.2 is released, you could configure that to use REST client instead. And therefore, if you don't have a need to be reactive, if you're willing to take synchronous oh, sorry about that. Anyway, that's going to become, I would think, the definitive way of doing networking in Spring. Is going to be web client / REST client for the future.
Or the declarative clients.
The HTTP interfaces, is that what you mean by declarative client? Yeah, HTTP exchange. I mean, they need a better name for it. It's the get exchange, post exchange, put exchange. I don't know what else is in 6.2 that's going to make me go, ooh, I need this. I think those are the big things. But then again, my work primarily, I feel like, is always consuming somebody else's RESTful web service, and that's what Spring is so very good at, anything else we should be... Go ahead.
Well, if you like REST client, then check out JDBC client. Same idea.
Oh yeah, I think Dan Vega did a video on that. I'm just so used to using the JPA, Spring Data JPA, that I do use JDBC template. I haven't looked at JDBC client.
It's the same idea as REST client, but as a replacement for JDBC template. That said, I'm a big fan of Spring Data JDBC as well.
See, that's the other thing. I rarely look at that because I usually go directly to Spring Data JPA and not Spring Data JDBC, and I probably should. And as Simon's pointing out, the Kraken virtual threads, well, those will only be in there if you're on Java 21, right? Or is that not true?
That sounds right. I get those a little bit confused, but yeah, I think that's right.
And the new, as he said, the new JDBC client as well, presumably. Okay, so I'll look for that also, but that's another couple months away then. I'm reluctant to go building apps based on milestone versions, Yeah,
it's usually safe, but it's not until it's a release candidate that you can feel mostly confident.
We're now in that intermediate time when Java's released a new version and all the vendors who are in the Java ecosystem suddenly act like, oh, I guess we should update, shouldn't we? Like they didn't know this.
Spring's been planning this for a while.
Who has?
Spring has been planning this for a while.
Spring was first, like today, okay, you can use the what's he say? You need to toggle a property to enable virtual. Oh yeah, I
Right.
remember seeing that pointed out somewhere. Um, but I don't know if that'll be true. If you may not need to enable it. I mean, at any rate, we'll see. Um, I'm waiting for Gradle to release the version that goes, oh yeah, we get Java 21 now. I'm waiting for IntelliJ, although IntelliJ apparently has a drop down already where you could download JDK 21. Actually, maybe they're all doing a decent job this time. We won't have to wait weeks for everybody to catch up. I know. So Simon says Lombok was also good about that, which that is kind of surprising. Although I don't know, Lombok is not a huge API, so I don't know how much they had to change in order to make it work for that. IntelliJ, the best part about what happened with IntelliJ is you didn't even have to update your installation. I don't know how they did it. It must have been some Boolean flag. It was already in there, something, that, okay, now you can download 21 or something. They must have already known. I mean, that's how they're all supposed to work, right? Is there anything you're waiting for, or when are you going to start playing with 21? You going to do 21 for the new book?
Oh, I've already been playing with it like in preview, but
Oh, you did? I'm never brave enough to do that.
as much fun as that is, I got to tell you, I mean, I've done some stuff with Crack, I've done some stuff with virtual threads, and those were a lot of fun. And I got a lot out of it, especially the virtual threads thing kind of blew my mind about how much you could get done with, virtual threads. It had so much more throughput. It was kind of mind blowing, but it's not one of those things that I've been chomping at the bit for. I'm excited to see it, but I'm not.
Well,
I didn't get as excited as most people did when Java 21 came about.
yeah, virtual threads for me is going to make all the servers better, but it's not going to. I mean, I don't write my own threading code in general. I mean, I do have to worry about locks and things like that and synchronization, but I don't. I mean, I'm on the server side. I usually let the server handle all the threading stuff, and yeah, those will get better or maybe more scalable might be a better way to say it. The stuff that I cared about in 21 is it's at long last. Pattern matching for switch is out, which I've been waiting for, because that combines beautifully with sealed interfaces. You can make, that way you cover all the sealed classes. You don't need an else clause in your switch statement. And with the pattern matching, and it's like about time. That's going through 4 previews before it was out. And now that's out. And so is record patterns, which is Kotlin's destructuring, basically. That's out too. Those 2 are the ones that are going to make a big impact on me. I don't know any of the other ones that are going to directly impact me, I think, as much as those will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about those little items, but when I'm going to be able to actually use them on a project is still yet to be seen. So,
all right,
it's hard to get that excited.
We're getting toward the end here. Let me show you something silly. Okay, so where do I have that? In my last newsletter, and what I've been doing for the past couple of weeks, I've been playing these AI tools, and one of those AI tools is from a company called Suno.ai, Suno.ai, and they have this tool called Chirp, and it's only available through Discord, like Midjourney is only available through Discord. If you go there and you put in a Chirp command and you put in some lyrics, or even have ChatGPT generate lyrics for you, you tell it what style of music you want, and it'll come up with 30 seconds worth of music in that style. And most of the time it's like, no, don't give up your day job, but sometimes it's okay. So I was trying to come up with a theme song for Tales from the Jar Side. And I put in the last newsletter, and I put this up as a YouTube short. I put in the emo one, but the one I want to show you, this is its world debut. It's only like 20 seconds long. This is the K-pop version. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, you ready for this?
I don't know.
Hey there, it's time to tune in to Tales from the Jar, so let's begin. Java, Kotlin, and Spring, oh my. Groovy graphic, don't be shy. Tales from the Jar side, oh yeah. Crack open the code, let's take a ride. From design patterns to the latest trends, your weekly tech talks that never end.
That was it.
It's still impressive.
It could be worse, and believe me, there were several that were worse, but there it is. I figured, what the heck? You know what? There's a Simon just made a comment about this article on data-oriented programming. That article has been out. If it's the same one I thought, the one on data-oriented programming, that's been out for weeks. And I read that, and that's in fact part of the reason I wanted to use sealed interfaces with records, and then the pattern matching, and then the enhanced switch statement. But he uses records in a very weird way in that article. I mean, like there's some syntax he wrote in there that doesn't work, as I recall. It's a really long article. You got to get like 3/4 of the way through it before you hit that. I'm going to go look at it again. But yes, there's an article. It's at InfoQ by Brian Getz about data-oriented programming that really is focusing on that combination I was mentioning of records are all final and they all extend java.lang.record. So they can't be in an inheritance hierarchy. So the only way to put records together in some kind of combination is by using interfaces. And by using sealed interfaces, you're saying only the following records. Then you could do your pattern matching and your switch expressions. And that's his approach to data-oriented programming, or at least some of it. Now, maybe I didn't understand part of it. That's inevitable, but okay, something getting there.
Yeah, Josh Long actually tweeted an example.
Who did?
Yesterday or the day before? Josh
Oh,
Long.
Josh. Yeah.
Yeah, and it showed a example with everything you just described, and it was kind of
I didn't see his example. I don't keep up with Twitter anymore. I mean, I glance at it. I'm so appalled by what has happened to that thing. I'm so disappointed. And if Elon really does stupidly actually try to charge people just to be there, that'll be the end. I spent so many years curating my Twitter feed, though, that my feed has always been pretty good. And also, I'm an old white male. It's not like I attract a bunch of trolls. You know what I mean? So it's easy for me, but I still don't want to do anything that supports him. So I miss things that Josh doesn't post elsewhere. I'm hoping that they start posting on Mastodon or Blue Sky or anywhere, that other than X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Paying to be the product. Like the guy, when my first clue was that he was a complete idiot and we didn't realize it was when they showed that first mock-up of the Cybertruck. I'm like, You got to be kidding. That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And it's finally coming out and it's every bit as ugly from what I understand, Oh, well, we'll see. That would start
topic, but I wish you could see what I'm watching right now. I got a dog in here who fell asleep on the back of a love seat in the office and has fallen behind the cushion and is struggling to get out.
All right. Well, let me let you go ahead and rescue the poor dog. Thank you very much for being here. Good to see you again. I hope I'll run into you somewhere soon. I don't know. I'll be at the No Fluff event
coming up.
I'll be at Reston. Are you going to be there?
Of course.
All right. Then I'll see you in Reston. Sorry about the networking issues, but I appreciate your patience on all that.
No problem. It's gotten better now that it's almost over.
What's that?
Your network has gotten better now that it's almost over.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know what the heck happened. Thank you very much. And I'll take care, man. Good to see you. Bye.